What if the most peaceful mountain escape turned into a nightmare? Sarah from London certainly has. She sent us this story about her trip to the Balkans, and it's a reminder that sometimes, the most beautiful destinations can hold dark secrets. The bus coughed to a halt, spitting dust into the already hazy Balkan air. Sarah stretched, stiff from the overnight ride, and stepped onto the cracked asphalt of what was optimistically called a bus station in the tiny mountain village of Bistra Voda. Bistra Voda, sparkling water, the sign proclaimed in faded Cyrillic. It sounded idyllic. Sarah was escaping the fluorescent hum of city life for a week of hiking and solitude in the rumored to be breathtaking mountains of the region. Her guidebook promised untouched landscapes, hearty food, and a glimpse into a world untouched by time. Excited, she hoisted her backpack, the weight of her city anxieties seeming to lighten slightly with each breath of crisp mountain air. The village itself was a cluster of stone houses clinging to the hillside, smoke curling lazily from chimneys. Cobbled streets, worn smooth by centuries of feet, wound their way upwards, promising scenic views and maybe, just maybe, a decent cup of coffee. A few locals, mostly older, watched Sarah with reserved smiles as she passed, their eyes holding something she couldn't quite decipher. Sarah found the guest house, a charmingly rustic place run by a woman named Elena. Elena, with her kind face and hands roughened by work, welcomed Sarah with steaming herbal tea and broken English. The guest house room was small but clean, overlooking a valley that plunged into a sea of evergreens. Peace. That's what Sarah had come for. The first few days were exactly what Sarah hoped for. She hiked winding trails, the only sounds the rustle of leaves and the occasional bleating of goats. She ate hearty stews in the village taverna, the food rich and flavorful. The villagers remained reserved, but not unfriendly. They nodded, they smiled, they went about their lives with a quiet intensity. It was on the fourth day, hiking a less traveled path to a supposedly spectacular waterfall, that things started to fill off. The path narrowed, the trees thickened, and the cheerful birdsong of the previous day seemed to have vanished. An unsettling quiet descended, broken only by the whisper of the wind through the dense foliage. Sarah rounded a bend, and there it was, the waterfall, a silver ribbon cascading down mossy rocks, even more breathtaking than the guidebook described. But as she approached, she noticed something else. A small clearing to the side of the path, hidden amongst the trees. And in the clearing, arranged on a mossy rock, were dolls. Not the cute, playful kind. These were old, porcelain dolls, their paint cracked, their eyes staring unblinkingly. They were dressed in faded, hand-stitched clothes, some missing limbs, others with cracked heads. They weren't arranged randomly. They were positioned as if in conversation. It felt deeply wrong, a child's plaything twisted into something unsettling and ancient. Sarah felt a prickle of unease, a cold touch against her skin despite the warm air. She told herself it was nothing, just some kids playing a strange game. She quickly snapped a picture of the waterfall, avoiding the dolls in the frame, and hurried away, the image of those staring porcelain eyes burning in her mind. That night, the village felt different. The usual quiet hum was replaced by an almost palpable silence. Even the tavern, usually lively with low conversation, was subdued. The villagers' reserved smiles seemed fixed now. Their eyes, when they glanced at Sarah, held a flicker of something she couldn't name, but it wasn't kindness. Walking back to the guest house, Sarah heard it. A faint sound, carried on the night air. Whispering. Just beyond hearing, like the rustle of dry leaves, but undeniably voices. She stopped, heart hammering, scanning the darkened streets. No one. Just the empty stone houses looming in the shadows. She hurried inside, bolting the guest house door behind her. Elena was in the common room, sitting by the dying embers of the fireplace, her face etched with a weariness Sarah hadn't seen before. "Did you hear whispering?" Sarah asked hesitantly. Elena looked up, her eyes flat. "The wind," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper itself. "Mountain wind. Always whispers in the mountains." Her explanation was hollow, unconvincing. Sarah went to her room, locking the door, but the whispering followed her. Faint, just beyond the threshold of hearing, but persistent. It felt like it was coming from outside, but also from within the walls. Sleep was elusive. Sarah tossed and turned, the whispering a constant, unsettling presence. Then, she dreamt. She dreamt of the dolls. They were larger now, life-sized, their porcelain faces smooth and inhuman. They stood in the village square, surrounding her. Their eyes, unblinking, focused on her. And they whispered. Not words Sarah could understand, but a chorus of sibilant sounds, a language that chilled her to the bone. She woke with a gasp, heart racing, drenched in cold sweat. The room was silent. The whispering was gone. Or was it? She strained her ears, listening intently. Silence. Just the normal night sounds of a mountain village. Relief washed over her. A nightmare, just a nightmare. Sarah was letting the strangeness of the dolls and the quiet villagers get to her. She got out of bed, needing water. As she reached for the bedside table, she noticed it. On the small wooden surface, right next to the water bottle, was a doll. Not one of the old, cracked porcelain dolls. This one was new, brightly colored, made of plastic. But the eyes were the same. Unblinking, staring, filled with an unnerving stillness. And clutched in its tiny plastic hand, was a miniature, hand-stitched dress, exactly like the ones the porcelain dolls in the clearing had been wearing. Panic seized Sarah. This wasn't a dream. This was real. Something was happening in Bystra Voda. Something old, something dark. And somehow, Sarah was now part of it. She looked at the doll, at its unblinking plastic stare. And then, Sarah heard it again. The whispering. But this time, it was louder, clearer. It wasn't the wind. It was coming from inside the room. From the walls. And as the whispering grew, filling the room, pressing in on Sarah, she realized it wasn't just voices. It was a language. A language directed at Sarah. And even though she couldn't understand the words, she understood the intent. It was a welcome. And it wasn't friendly. Sarah threw on her clothes, grabbed her backpack, and flung open the guest house door, ignoring the protests of Elena, who appeared in the hallway, her face now not just weary, but deeply, terribly afraid. Sarah ran. She ran through the silent, whispering village, the stone houses seeming to lean in, the shadows stretching like grasping fingers. Sarah ran down the cobbled streets, the whispering growing louder, chasing her, until she reached the bus station, the cracked asphalt, the promise of escape. Sarah didn't look back. Her heart was pounding and didn't stop pounding until she was miles away, on a bus rattling down the mountain roads, leaving Bystra Voda behind. Sarah never went back to the mountains. The peace she sought, she didn't find there. Instead, Sarah found a quiet that was anything but peaceful, a welcome that felt like a curse, and the unblinking stare of porcelain eyes that still haunt her dreams. Sometimes, even in the bustling city, surrounded by noise and light, Sarah still hears it. The whispering of Bystra Voda. Sarah's experience reminds us that travel isn't always sunshine and rainbows. Sometimes, the unexpected happens. And if you have a travel tale that's a little out of the ordinary, send it to us. We might just feature your story on the channel.